The Voraks had ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years. They were tall, cold-blooded reptiles with scales as dark as the void between stars. Their eyes glowed red in the darkness, and their claws could tear through metal like paper. Every species they met had only two choices. They could kneel and serve, or they could die. Most chose to kneel. High Tyrant Calthrix sat on his throne made of bones from 100 conquered worlds. He had lived for 400 years, and in all that time, he had never known defeat. His empire stretched across 400 star systems. Billions of slaves worked in his mines, built his ships, and fed his armies. The Voraks were the masters of everything they could see. In their ancient records, there was a small note about a tiny blue planet in a forgotten corner of the galaxy. The planet was called Earth by its people. The Voraks had found it 2,000 years ago, when the creatures living there were still building simple houses and fighting with swords. The survey team had laughed at these weak beings. They walked on two legs, had soft skin, and died so easily. They were not worth conquering. They were not worth anything at all. The Voraks forgot about Earth. They had bigger things to worry about. They had empires to crush and species to enslave. What could a bunch of soft-skinned primates ever do to threaten them? This was their greatest mistake. On Earth, the humans grew. They fought wars against each other, terrible wars that killed millions. But they also built things. They created medicine that cured diseases. They invented machines that could fly through the sky. They split the atom and touched the moon. By the year 2147, humanity had spread beyond their home world. They had cities on Mars and stations orbiting Jupiter. They were reaching for the stars. Commander Lisa Grant was 42 years old. She had grown up on a farm in Montana, where the sky stretched forever and the mountains touched the clouds. She had always dreamed of flying, of going higher and farther than anyone had gone before. Now she commanded the Horizon's Edge, humanity's first ship with a faster-than-light drive. Her crew was small, just 30 people, all of them volunteers who knew they might never come home. The drive was experimental. It had only been tested twice before, and both times the results had been unpredictable. But Lisa didn't care about the risks. She cared about discovery. She cared about finding out what was waiting in the darkness between the stars. The jump was rough. The ship shook and groaned as reality bent around them. Some of the crew got sick. Others prayed to gods they weren't sure existed. But when the shaking stopped and the view screen cleared, they saw something that took their breath away. Stars. Thousands of them. They had traveled farther from Earth than any human had ever gone. Lisa was about to order a celebration when her sensor officer, a young man named Kevin Park, spoke in a voice that was barely a whisper. "Commander, there's something out there." The ship appeared on their screens like a nightmare made real. It was massive, 10 times the size of the Horizon's Edge, covered in weapons and armor. Its hull was black, and strange symbols glowed along its surface. This was not a human ship. This was something else entirely. Lisa felt her heart beating fast, but she kept her voice calm. "Open a channel," she said. "Let's see if they want to talk." The response came in a language that their computers couldn't understand at first. But after a few seconds, a translation appeared on the screen. The words were cold and simple. "Unknown vessel. You are in Vorak space. Surrender immediately. Your species now belongs to the Dominion." Lisa read the words twice. She looked at her crew, at their pale faces and trembling hands. She thought about Earth, about her family, about everything humanity had built and dreamed of. Then she thought about kneeling to these aliens, about watching her people become slaves. She started to laugh. The sound surprised everyone, including herself. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the laugh of someone who had been told to do something impossible and had decided to do the opposite instead. "I don't think so," she said into the communicator. "We're not surrendering to anyone." She turned to her pilot. "Get us out of here, now." The Varak ship fired. Energy beams tore through space, burning holes in the horizon's edge. The ship screamed as metal melted and systems failed. But the experimental drive still worked. Lisa's pilot, a woman named Rosa Martinez, who had flown rescue missions in the asteroid belt, pushed the engines beyond their limits. The ship jumped, spaced, and somehow, against all odds, they escaped. The journey home took 3 weeks. The horizon's edge was dying. Half the systems were broken. The hull had holes that the crew had to patch with whatever they could find. 4 people died from their injuries. But Lisa kept them going. She refused to let them give up. When they finally reached Earth's solar system, Lisa sent a message ahead. It was short and simple. "This is Commander Lisa Grant of the Horizon's Edge. We have made first contact with an alien civilization. They are hostile. They are powerful. And they are coming." The message reached Earth 12 hours before the ship did. By the time Lisa landed, the whole world was watching. Leaders from every nation gathered to hear her report. She stood before them, tired and wounded, and told them what she had seen. "They call themselves the Varaks," she said. "They have ruled this part of the galaxy for thousands of years. They enslave every species they find. They don't negotiate. They don't show mercy. And they know we exist now." A politician asked the question everyone was thinking. "What do we do?" Lisa looked at him with eyes that had seen the face of humanity's greatest threat. "We get ready," she said. "We build ships. We make weapons. We prepare for war. Because they're coming whether we're ready or not." The room fell silent. Everyone knew that everything had changed. Humanity had dreamed of meeting other life in the universe. They had imagined friendly aliens, wise beings who would share their knowledge and welcome humans into a galactic community. Instead, they had found monsters. But humans had faced monsters before. They had survived ice ages and plagues, wars and disasters. They had always found a way to keep going, to keep fighting, to keep hoping. The Varaks had conquered hundreds of species. They had never lost. They feared nothing in the universe. They had never met humans before, and that was about to change everything. 6 months passed after the Horizon's Edge returned to Earth. Humanity worked faster than they had ever worked before. Factories ran day and night. Scientists gave up sleep to develop new weapons. Soldiers trained for battles against enemies they had never seen. The whole world united for the first time in history, not because they wanted to, but because they had no choice. It wasn't enough that the Varak's fleet arrived on a cold morning in December. 200 warships appeared at the edge of the solar system like a swarm of metal locusts. Each ship was larger than anything humanity had built. Each one carried enough weapons to destroy a city in seconds. High Tyrant Calfrix himself commanded the invasion from his flagship, the Eternal Dominion. He had come to see these strange creatures who had dared to refuse his soldiers. Earth's defenses looked like toys compared to the Varak's fleet. 30 ships, most of them built in the last 6 months. Orbital platforms around Earth and the Moon. Missile stations on Mars. It was everything humanity had. And it was not nearly enough that General Marcus Webb commanded Earth's forces from a bunker deep beneath the Rocky Mountains. He was 60 years old, with gray hair and tired eyes that had seen too many wars. He had fought in conflicts on 3 continents and had always found a way to win. But as he watched the Varak's fleet on his screens, he knew this was different. This was not a war humanity could win. Not today, but they could make the enemy pay. "All ships," he said into his communicator, "you know what we're facing. You know the odds. I'm not going to lie to you and say we can beat them, but we can hurt them. We can show them that humans don't surrender. We can make them remember this day forever. The battle began at noon. Vorax ships moved toward Earth like a wave of darkness. Human ships flew to meet them, tiny and brave against the overwhelming enemy. The first human ship to die was the Valiant, a destroyer commanded by Captain Ben Howard. His last words were a simple order to his crew: ram them. The Valiant crashed into a Vorax cruiser at full speed. Both ships exploded in a ball of fire that lit up the darkness of space. It was the first time in 3,000 years that the Vorax had lost a ship to a species they were trying to conquer. It would not be the last. Human pilots flew their ships into enemy hangars and detonated their reactors. They launched missiles carrying nuclear warheads into Vorax engines. They fought with a fury that the Vorax had never seen before. These soft-skinned creatures were supposed to be weak. They were supposed to be afraid. Instead, they attacked like wild animals, caring nothing for their own survival. On Earth, the ground forces prepared for invasion. The Vorax landed their troops in major cities around the world. They expected quick surrender. They expected the humans to fall to their knees and beg for mercy. Private Danny Ortiz was 23 years old. He had grown up in Houston, the son of a mechanic and a nurse. He had joined the army because he wanted to help people, to protect his family and his country. Now he stood in a mountain pass in Colorado, watching Vorax soldiers march toward his position. There were thousands of them. Danny had 40 soldiers with him and orders to hold the pass for as long as possible. Behind them, 10,000 civilians were running for the underground shelters. Every minute Danny's team held was another minute for those people to survive. "All right," Danny said to his soldiers. "We all know we're not walking away from this. But those people behind us are going to live because of what we do here. That's worth something. That's worth everything." The Vorax attacked. They came in waves, their weapons burning the air and melting rock. Danny's soldiers fell one by one, but they kept fighting. They used every bullet, every grenade, every trick they knew. When their weapons ran out, they used knives. When their knives broke, they used their hands. Danny fought for 6 hours. He killed over 100 Vorax soldiers. His armor was broken, his body was bleeding, and he could barely stand. But he kept fighting. A Vorax commander finally faced him, a massive creature twice his size with claws like swords. "Why do you keep fighting?" the Vorax asked. "You cannot win. Your species is finished." Danny smiled through the blood on his face. His helmet camera was still recording, sending his final moments to the command center miles away. "You don't get it," he said. "We don't fight because we think we'll win. We fight because it's the right thing to do. Come on, you ugly bastard. I'm just getting started." The Vorax killed him moments later, but the pass held. The civilians escaped, and Danny Ortiz became a legend that would inspire humans for generations to come. The battle for Earth lasted 3 days. In the end, the Vorax won. They destroyed the orbital platforms. They bombed the lunar bases. They occupied the major cities and declared humanity conquered, that they paid a price. 47 Vorax ships were destroyed. Thousands of Vorax soldiers were killed. It was more casualties than the Dominion had suffered in the last 500 years of conquest combined. The humans had lost, but they had proven something important. They could hurt the enemy. High Tyrant Calthrix walked through the ruins of what had been New York City. His soldiers had secured the area, but they were nervous. They kept looking at shadows, jumping at sounds. These humans were supposed to be slaves now, but they didn't act like slaves. Resistance started within weeks. Factories that were supposed to produce resources for the Vorax exploded without warning. Patrols disappeared in the night and were found dead in the morning. Messages appeared on walls everywhere. "We don't surrender. We don't forget. We will be free. Telthrix had conquered 37 species. None of them had ever fought back like this. None of them had ever refused to accept defeat. He stood in the ruins and felt something strange in his chest. It was a cold sensation, a feeling of uncertainty that he had never experienced before. His advisors told him the resistance would end soon. They told him the humans would learn to obey like every other species. But Telthrix was old. He had seen many things in his 400 years of life. And as he watched his soldiers patrol the streets of a city that should have been peaceful, he understood that something was different about these creatures. They had lost everything. Their cities were burning. Their people were dying. By all logic, they should have given up. Instead, they were just getting started. For the first time in his long life, the High Tyrant of the Varax Dominion felt afraid. 5 years had passed since the Varax conquered Earth. The aliens controlled the cities, the skies, and the oceans. They had built massive fortresses on every continent. Their ships patrolled the atmosphere day and night, watching for any sign of rebellion. To anyone looking from above, it seemed like humanity had been completely defeated. But the Varax couldn't see what was happening. Underground, beneath the mountains and deserts, beneath the ruins of destroyed cities, humanity was building something new. Tunnels stretched for hundreds of miles, connecting hidden bases that the Varax didn't know existed. Factories worked in secret, producing weapons and supplies. Training camps prepared soldiers for battles that were still to come. The resistance was growing. Dr. Nina Vasquez was 45 years old. Before the invasion, she had been one of the brightest scientists on Earth, working on energy systems that could have powered cities. When the Varax came, she had survived by hiding in a sewer system for 3 weeks, eating rats and drinking dirty water. Most people would have given up. Nina just got angry. Now she ran the Resistance's main research facility, hidden beneath what used to be Yellowstone National Park. Her team of scientists and engineers worked every day to understand Varax technology and make it better. They had captured enemy weapons, vehicles, and even a small ship. They had taken everything apart and learned how it worked. The thing about the Varax, Nina explained to Commander Jake Morrison during a briefing, is that they stopped trying to improve. They conquered everyone they met, so they never had to get better. They've been using the same basic technology for 1,000 years. Jake Morrison was the leader of the resistance. He was 38 years old, a former Special Forces soldier who had lost his entire unit during the invasion. He had spent 5 years fighting in the shadows, leading attacks on Varax patrols and freeing prisoners from labor camps. His face was covered with scars, and his eyes were cold as ice. But when Nina showed him what her team had built, those eyes lit up with something that looked like hope. "We've made energy weapons that are stronger than theirs," Nina said. "We've created armor that can stop their bullets. And we've figured out how to jam their communications. They won't be able to call for help when we attack." Jake smiled for the first time in months. "How soon can we be ready?" 6 more months. Maybe less if we work faster." Jake nodded. "Then we work faster." Captain Maria Santos led the first major attack. She was 32 years old, born in Miami to parents who had immigrated from Cuba. She had been a pilot before the invasion, flying cargo ships between Earth and Mars. Now she commanded a team of 50 resistance fighters, some of the best soldiers humanity had left. Their target was a Varax garrison in what used to be Chicago. The building was huge, heavily defended, and housed over 300 enemy soldiers. Any normal attack would be suicide. But Maria had a plan. "The Varax think they know everything about this city," she told her team before the mission. "They've mapped every street and building. But they don't know about the old subway tunnels. They don't know about the basement that connects to the power grid. And they definitely don't know that we've been watching them for 3 months." The attack began at midnight. Maria's team came from underground, appearing inside the garrison's perimeter before the Varax even knew they were there. They moved fast and quiet, taking out guards with weapons that made no sound. By the time the alarm went off, half the Varax soldiers were already dead. The battle lasted 4 hours. The resistance fighters used every trick they had learned in 5 years of guerrilla warfare. They set traps in corridors. They collapsed ceilings on enemy positions. They fought with a coordination that the Varax had never seen from humans before. When the sun rose over Chicago, the garrison was in flames. 300 Varax soldiers were dead. Maria's team had lost only 7 people. She stood in the ruins of the enemy fortress and sent a message to the resistance command. Chicago is free. The news spread like fire through dry grass. For the first time since the invasion, humans had won a real victory. Not just a small attack on a patrol, but a complete destruction of an enemy base. People who had given up hope began to believe again. People who had hidden started to fight, but the most important effect was felt far beyond Earth. The Varax Dominion controlled hundreds of worlds, and on each of those worlds, there were slaves who had stopped believing that freedom was possible. They had been taught for generations that the Varax were unbeatable. Resistance was pointless. Obedience was the only way to survive. Now, they heard whispers about a small blue planet where the slaves had refused to stay conquered, where the weak creatures had beaten the Varax in open battle, where something that had seemed impossible had actually happened. On the ocean world of Thesser 4, an old equerry named Kalis heard the news. His people had served the Varax for 600 years. They had forgotten what freedom felt like. But as he listened to the story of Chicago, he felt something stir in his chest. Something he had thought was dead forever. Hope. On Morthax Prime, the insectoid Morthani stopped working in the mines for a moment. They had been slaves for so long that they had no word for freedom in their language anymore. But they had ears. They heard the stories, and they began to talk among themselves in ways they had never talked before. On a dozen worlds, then 100, the news spread. The Varax were not unbeatable. Resistance was not pointless. Somewhere in the galaxy, there were people who fought even when winning seemed impossible. Back on Earth, Jake Morrison looked at the reports coming in from his intelligence network. The Varax were scared. They were sending more troops to Earth, pulling soldiers from other conquered worlds. They were making mistakes, getting desperate, losing their careful control. "This is just the beginning," he said to his commanders. "We've shown them we can win. Now we need to show the galaxy that they don't have to be slaves anymore." Maria Santos, her arms still bandaged from the Chicago battle, nodded. "How do we do that?" Jake's eyes were hard as stone. "We find allies. We build an army, and we take the fight to them." The Varax had ruled for 3,000 years because no one believed they could be beaten. Humanity was about to change that belief forever. Ambassador Claire Bennett had spent 8 years traveling through space. She had left Earth on a refugee ship during the invasion, one of the few thousand humans who escaped before the Varax closed the skies. Most refugees had hidden on distant moons and asteroids, waiting for the war to end. Claire had done something different. She had gone looking for allies. Claire was 50 years old now, with gray hair and lines on her face that hadn't been there before the war. She had been a diplomat once, working for the United Nations, trying to solve problems with words instead of weapons. That experience was useless against the Varax. You couldn't negotiate with creatures who saw you as nothing more than animals to be. Enslaved. But the Varax had other slaves. Hundreds of species, conquered over thousands of years, forced to serve the Dominion against their will. Claire believed that if these species could see that resistance was possible, they might be willing to fight. She had spent 8 years trying to prove it. Her ship was small, just a stolen Varax transport that she had learned to fly herself. She traveled from world to world, carrying recordings of human victories, stories of resistance, and a simple message. You don't have to be slaves forever. Most species didn't believe her. The Varax had been their masters for so long that they couldn't imagine anything else. Some thought she was crazy. Some thought she was a Varax trick. Some just looked at her with empty eyes and walked away. But some listened on Nesserfor, the ocean world of the Aquari. Claire finally met someone who wanted to hear more. Kalis was the eldest of his people, a creature who had lived for 300 years and remembered a time before Varax rule. His body was covered with blue and green scales, and his eyes were large and dark, like deep water. "You speak of hope," Kalis said as they floated in an underwater chamber, far from Varax sensors. "But hope has only brought my people pain. Every time we tried to resist, they killed thousands of us. We learned to stop hoping." Claire understood his fear. She had felt it herself in those dark days after the invasion when everything seemed lost. But she had also seen what humans could do when they refused to give up. "I know you've suffered," she said. "I know resistance seems impossible. But look at what we've done. We were nothing. A small species on a tiny planet that the Varax didn't even bother to conquer at first. And we've hurt them. We've won battles. We've proven that they can be beaten." She showed him the recordings. The Battle of Chicago. Raids on Varax supply lines. Human soldiers standing against impossible odds and refusing to break. Kalis watched in silence, his ancient eyes seeing something they had not seen in centuries. "Your people are remarkable," he said finally. "You fight without hope of victory. You die rather than surrender. We Aquari have forgotten how to do that." Claire shook her head. "You haven't forgotten. You've just been waiting for someone to remind you. Help us. Fight with us. Not because you're sure we'll win, but because freedom is worth fighting for even if we lose." Kalis was quiet for a long time. The water around them was still and cold. Finally, he spoke. "The Varax killed my children," he said. "They killed my wife. They made my people into servants who clean their ships and grow their food. For 600 years, I have told myself that there was nothing I could do. That resistance would only bring more death." He looked at Claire with eyes that suddenly seemed younger. "I was wrong. Better to die fighting than to live as slaves. Tell your people that the Aquari will stand with them." One by one, Claire visited the conquered worlds. Each one was different. Each species had its own history, its own reasons to fear the Varax, its own wounds that needed healing. But she found allies in the most unexpected places. The Morthani were insectoid beings who had been slaves for 800 years. They worked in Varax mines, digging precious metals from the ground until their bodies broke. Their queen, a massive creature named Zixtal, had lost 3 hives to Varax punishment for minor acts of disobedience. She had sworn to never resist again, but when Claire showed her what humans had done, something changed in her compound eyes. "You are small," Zixtal said. "Weak, soft. The Varax should have crushed you easily." "They should have," Claire agreed. "But they didn't, because we refused to be crushed." Zixtal made a clicking sound that Claire's translator couldn't understand. Then she spoke again. "The Morthani are many. We have been waiting for a sign that the time to fight has come. Perhaps you are that sign." The Valari were beings of light, ethereal creatures who had once been artists and philosophers before the Varax hunted them nearly to extinction. Only a few thousand remained, hiding in the clouds of a gas giant where the Varax ships couldn't follow. Their leader, a shimmering presence called Solara, was skeptical at first. "We Valari do not fight," Solara said. "We create. We dream. We are not warriors." "You don't have to be warriors," Claire said. "Your technology, your knowledge, your ability to communicate across vast distances without being detected. All of that can help us. And when we win, you can create again. You can dream without fear. Solara flickered with colors that Claire's human eyes couldn't name. You truly believe you can defeat the Dominion? Claire thought about her home, burning under Varak's occupation. She thought about the millions who had died and the millions more who lived as slaves. She thought about all the reasons to give up. I believe we have to try, she said. Because if we don't, things will never change. The Varaks will rule forever. Your people will hide in these clouds until there are none of you left. And humanity will be just another forgotten species in their records. It took 2 years to build the alliance. There were setbacks. A Kreth leader who had agreed to join was discovered by the Varaks and executed. A convoy of Morthani ships was destroyed before it could reach the meeting point. Some species changed their minds, too afraid to continue, but slowly, impossibly, it came together. 12 species agreed to fight. 300 ships from a dozen different worlds gathered at a hidden point in space, far from Varak's patrols. Humans stood alongside Aquari, Morthani, Valari, and Kreth. For the first time in 3,000 years, the Conquered had united. Commander Jake Morrison, now leading humanity's forces, spoke to the assembled fleet through a translator that broadcast his words in every language. For too long, we've each fought alone, he said. We've hidden in the shadows, hoping the Varaks would ignore us, praying they wouldn't notice our small acts of defiance. That ends today. Today, we stop hiding. Today, we fight back. Together. The first attack was against a Varak supply depot. It was a complete victory. Then another attack and another. Each one was larger than the last. Each one brought more species into the alliance as they saw that resistance was real. The Varaks tried to respond, but they were fighting on too many fronts. Their carefully controlled empire was cracking. Slaves were rising up on world after world. Ships that were supposed to maintain order were needed elsewhere, and at the center of it all were the humans. The small, soft-skinned creatures who were supposed to be nothing. The species that had taught the galaxy how to hope again. The war for freedom had truly begun. High Tyrant Calthrix stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched his empire burn. For 10 years, he had told himself that the human problem would be solved, that the resistance would be crushed, that the natural order of the galaxy would be restored. He had been wrong. The Alliance fleet filled his view screen. Over 1,000 ships from dozens of species. Human destroyers flew alongside Aquari cruisers and Morthani swarm carriers. Valari scout ships glowed like stars between massive Kreth battlecruisers. It was a force unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen, united by a single purpose, the end of Varak's rule. And they were heading straight for Varak's prime. Calthrix had gathered every ship he could. His fleet was still larger than the enemy's, still more powerful on paper. But numbers meant nothing against an enemy that refused to count the odds. He had learned that lesson on Earth, and he had never forgotten it. "My lord," his admiral said, "they are entering the outer defense zone. Should we engage?" Calthrix looked at the tactical display. His outer defenses were being overwhelmed. Stations that had protected Varak's prime for 1,000 years were being destroyed one by one. Human ships led every attack, taking the heaviest fire, absorbing punishment that should have destroyed them, and continuing forward. "Engage," he said. "All ships." The final battle began. Captain Maria Santos commanded the Alliance strike force from the bridge of her ship, the Liberation. She was 42 years old now, and her left arm was cybernetic, a replacement for the one she had lost in battle 3 years ago. She had fought in over 100 engagements since Chicago. She had killed more Varaks than she could count. But this battle was different. This was the end. "All wings follow my lead," she said into the communicator. We punch through their lines and head straight for the flagship. Kill the snake, and the body dies. The Liberation dove into the Varax formation. Enemy fire lit up the darkness around her, destroying Alliance ships and Varax vessels alike. It was chaos, beautiful and terrible. Ships rammed each other. Explosions bloomed like flowers of light. The screams of the dying mixed with the cheers of the victorious. Maria didn't slow down. Their ship was hit again and again, armor peeling away, systems failing. Her crew worked frantically to keep them flying. All around her, Alliance ships were dying to clear a path, but they were winning. The Varax had never faced an enemy like this. Their strategies were based on opponents who valued their own lives, who retreated when the odds turned against them, who surrendered when defeat became certain. The Alliance did none of these things. They kept attacking even when their ships were burning. They rammed enemy vessels when their weapons failed. They fought like beings who had already accepted death and feared nothing anymore, because that was exactly what they were. On a dozen worlds, slaves watched the battle through stolen transmissions. They saw the impossible happening. They saw the masters who had ruled for 3,000 years being pushed back. They saw human ships leading the charge, never stopping, never retreating, never giving up. And on those worlds, they began to rise. Varax garrisons that had controlled populations for centuries suddenly found themselves surrounded by angry mobs. Weapons that had been hidden for generations appeared in the hands of former slaves. The empire that Kelthrix had spent his whole life building was coming apart at the seams. Maria's ship reached the flagship's perimeter. The Eternal Dominion was massive, a vessel built to intimidate and destroy. Its weapons could have torn the Liberation apart in seconds. But Maria had something the Varax didn't have. She had All Eyes and a quarry battleship rammed the flagship's port side, its crew sacrificing themselves to disable the main weapons array. Morthani fighters swarmed the hull, cutting through armor with their acid weapons. Valari scouts blinded the sensors with bursts of light. And in the confusion, Maria landed her ship directly on the flagship's hull. She led the boarding team herself. 30 humans and 20 warriors from allied species, cutting through the corridors of the enemy command ship. Varax soldiers tried to stop them. They failed. Maria moved through the ship like a storm, her cybernetic arm wielding a plasma blade taken from a Varax commander she had killed years ago. They found Kelthrix in his throne room, surrounded by his elite guard. The High Tyrant was old, ancient by Varax standards, but his eyes still burned with cold fire. His guards were the best warriors the Dominion had, trained since birth to protect their master. The battle was fierce and brief. Maria's team was smaller, but they had been forged in 10 years of war. They knew how the Varax fought. They knew their weaknesses. And they had something the elite guard did not have, nothing left to lose. When it was over, Kelthrix stood alone among the bodies of his protectors. His wounds were severe green blood flowing from a dozen cuts. But he refused to fall. You have achieved nothing, he snarled at Maria. My people will never surrender. We will fight to the last soldier, the last ship, the last breath. Maria walked toward him, stepping over the bodies of his guards. Her team stood behind her. Humans, Aquari, Morthani, Velari, and Kreth. Former slaves who had become warriors. Species that had been enemies for centuries, now united. I know, she said. That's what makes us different from you. She raised her blade. You built an empire on fear. You conquered because no one believed they could resist. But humans? We don't need to believe we'll win. We just need to believe it's worth fighting for. Kelthrix laughed, a bitter sound. And what have you won? Even if you kill me, the Dominion will continue. There are other commanders, other fleets. This war will last 100 years. Maria shook her head. No, it won't. Because we didn't just come here to kill you. We came here to show the galaxy that tyrants can fall. And they've been watching." She gestured to a screen that showed the battle outside. The Varax fleet was breaking. Ships were surrendering. Others were retreating. On planet after planet, the slaves were rising. The Dominion was crumbling faster than anyone had imagined. "Your empire was built on the belief that you couldn't be beaten," Maria said. "We just proved that belief wrong. And once people know that freedom is possible, they will never accept chains again." She killed him with a single blow. The High Tyrant of the Varax Dominion, undefeated for 400 years, fell dead at her feet. The final battle lasted 18 more hours. Varax forces fought desperately, knowing that defeat meant the end of everything they had built. But the tide had turned. The Alliance pushed forward, sector by sector, until the last enemy ship surrendered, when the guns finally went silent. Over Varax Prime, the galaxy had changed forever. 1 year later, Ambassador Claire Bennett addressed the newly formed Galactic Council. Representatives from over 40 species filled the Great Hall, free for the first time in their histories. "We came to the stars," she said, "and found ourselves in chains. We could have accepted our fate. We could have bowed, as so many had before us. But that's not who we are." She looked out at the assembly. Aquari and Morthani, Valari and Kreth, and dozens of others, species that had been enemies and slaves, now building something new together. "Humans aren't special because we're stronger or smarter or more advanced," Claire continued. "We're special because we refuse to give up. We fight not because we're certain of victory, but because some things are worth fighting for even when victory seems impossible." She paused, remembering all the people who had died to make this moment possible. Danny Ortiz holding a mountain pass. Maria Santos storming the flagship. Countless others whose names would never be known, who had given everything so that others could be free. "The galaxy taught us that we were nothing," Claire said. "We taught the galaxy that nothing can stop us." The council chambers erupted in applause. Every species, every representative, every former slave cheering together. The sound echoed through the hall and out into the stars, carrying a message to every corner of the galaxy. The Varax had ruled for 3,000 years. They had conquered hundreds of worlds and enslaved billions of beings. They had seemed unstoppable, invincible, eternal, and then they had met humanity. On Earth, the rebuilding had begun. The scars of war would take generations to heal. Cities were still in ruins. Millions of graves marked the cost of freedom. But the sky was clear, and humans walked under their own sun again. Maria Santos, now a general in the Alliance military, stood on a hill overlooking what had been New York City. Construction machines worked in the distance, building new homes on the ashes of the old. Jake Morrison stood beside her, his face older, his eyes still hard. "Do you think it was worth it?" he asked. "All the death, all the suffering, everything we lost." Maria thought about the question. She thought about friends who had died, about the arm she had lost, about the years of war that had consumed her life. Then she looked up at the sky, at the stars that humans had once dreamed about and now walked among as equals. "Ask me again in 100 years, she said. "But yeah, I think it was. The universe would never be the same. Humanity had awakened, and nothing would ever put them to sleep again."